teach your children well. Their father's help did slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams.
Bonnie is the mother of a differently abled daughter and a teacher of students with disabilities. She's a former SEPTA president, active volunteer, and activist. Bonnie is the co-founder of Multiple Pathways to a High School Diploma Facebook page. She has joined with parents and educators from across the island and state, working with state legislators and Board of Regents members to open doors and provide a pathway to a diploma for our special education students.
Good evening. I have just a quick question. Everybody a teacher in the room? Or do we have just some parents too? Good, thank you. All right, so I am a teacher. I teach in a 4th grade inclusion class. 4th grade has always been a testing grade. I will say, and I'm going off script here right now because I listened to the 3 speakers before me and they light a fire under me and I get aggravated and I agree with everything they say. I love when somebody comes into my room, wants to watch what I do, and then take me aside afterwards and give me constructive advice. I love that. I love when my administrator visits me, and then we sit down afterwards and we say, and I invite my administrator, come in, I'm having a problem, I don't know what I'm doing. I love assessments. Love them. Love getting data back that can tell me where I might be missing something, that tells me how I can better serve the children in my room. I love that kind of data. I have always loved that kind of data, long before they told me that I, excuse my language, stink at my job. So when they tell me that I don't want APPR because I don't want to be assessed, yeah, no. Assess me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, twice on Sunday if you like. I'm not afraid of being assessed. I'm not afraid of my children taking tests. A fair test that doesn't try to trick them, fool them, lie to them, cheat them, I'm all for it. Have at it. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my script. Okay. I like using data to drive instruction. I think we all do, deciding what to focus on, what my kids need to feel successful. I feel terrible most of the time lately. Okay? Students with disabilities can lag up to 2 years behind their neurotypical peers. The rotten core is 2 years ahead academically. So I am administering tests that are up to 4 years beyond my students. 4 years. 4 developmental years. You know what? If you have parents, the difference between a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old is huge. 2 years ago in a separate location, at a prior position I had, 10 minutes into the New York State ELA, one of my students put his head down and said, I can't. Not I won't, not I refuse, I can't. For a teacher, I never want to hear my kids say, I can't do something. A small, quiet, I can't, and I felt smaller than that 11-year-old in that room that day. New York State Ed is telling us things are better. We just heard they're better. Better why? Because the students with disabilities may sit all day. Because what? All of a sudden they have a limited time? Are they getting a higher grade for tenacity? Is tenacity going to give them a better grade? I agree with Pete when he said he thinks it's worse. I think it's much worse. How do you do that to a kid with a learning disability? How do you ask them? You already asked them to take a test that's light years ahead of them, many of them. Not all of them, not all children with learning disabilities struggle with these tests. You know, everybody's differently abled. But you're asking a child with this, you know, in my case, my daughter is dyslexic. So I'm going to ask her to sit for what, 6 hours, 7 hours? Like, where does the insanity stop? These are children, and that just drives me crazy. They're going to be losing entire days to testing. That is well above their level. And what else are our learning disabled children learning in this farce? And I just skipped a slide. Sorry. Some information I'd like to share that I read from grade schools, an article I read. In the city, well, not just in the city, everywhere actually, we know that large performance gaps exist between students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers. We also know that students with disabilities continue to be retained much more often than the general population. More than 1/3 are retained at grade level at least once, usually in elementary school, despite the fact that retention has been shown to be an ineffective intervention to improving academic achievement. The data also shows, more importantly, that students who are retained are more likely to drop out of school later. Okay? Students that are retained more than once or more, it's like exponentially. If you're retained more than once, the dropout rate is exponential. Research on retention shows that grade repeaters as adults are more likely to be unemployed, living on public assistance, or in prison than adults who did not repeat a grade. Increased possibility of dropping out. Data shows that students with disabilities fail large-scale tests at higher rates than other students, especially in the years immediately following the introduction of such tests. So like right now. One important reason for this is their lack of access to the curriculum on which the tests are based. I'd like to actually remind my daughter with a learning disability is a junior in high school, and she was introduced to the Common Core in the back end of 8th grade. Okay? And I actually think that that's so ludicrous that sometimes that kind of takes me by surprise as well. So I know why I would refuse to allow my daughter with learning disabilities to take these tests, but before I came here tonight, actually last week, I asked a bunch of other moms what they thought as well. And they cited the test and punish cycle that students with disabilities are experiencing due to the outside testing. There are plenty of internal assessments. I know what I'm teaching my students. When in our time as educators be better utilized with me assessing what I think I've taught them, wouldn't assessments written by all our highly educated and qualified teachers be more appropriate? Assessments that would truly drive instruction, drive IEP goals and teaching plans. What about the long-term anxiety we have? We have third graders that are pulling out hair, eyelashes, eyebrows, and what are they doing to relieve that anxiety once they get to high school? In Long Island, we have already admitted we have a drug problem. So, like, do we actually think in some weird way that those two things aren't coming together? And lastly, it is robbing a general education child of any joy of learning. What exactly do you think is happening to the kid that already feels inadequate, stupid, different, and disenfranchised? I don't know about you, but my mom always used to say, you're only a kid once. You'll have adult responsibilities and care soon enough and for the rest of your life. Guard your childhood. Guard it with all you have. And don't we owe our children that? I think to myself all the time that I owe that to my kids. They're entitled to their childhoods. Last week I read that one of those memes on Facebook, I want my child to learn to think out of the box, not to fill in little bubbles. And I liked that. And I think with children that are differently abled, they're already thinking out of the box. The data is there. For children that have learning disabilities, there's loads of data on how brilliant they are and how successful they are later in life, and they become happy contributing members of society. So I think to myself, why would I set my child up to fail when they have so much untapped potential? Why would I expect non-standard students to be successful at standardized tests? And besides all the things that Mike mentioned about, they don't matter. These tests don't count. And if the state is already admitting that the standards are bad, then why would you want to have your child assessed on bad standards? I think that would just be a colossal waste of educational time, frankly. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. So I have two children, actually. I have a son, and he never gets mentioned because he's at Stony Brook, and he's all happy and whatever. And I have a daughter who's 17. And my daughter has been classified since kindergarten with what I call the trifecta of learning disabilities. She was initially picked up as a speech or language, and then in 4th grade she was also identified as dyslexic and ADHD. When she realized she couldn't read fluently, I thought it was because, is it because she doesn't have the language? Or does she not have the language because she can't read fluently? Or does she not have either because she can't pay attention? And this is what kept me up at night until I really came to this Regents mess that I'm going to get to in a minute. And like many parents with children with learning disabilities, I learned every single thing that I could about educating her. My husband and I were and still are active participants in her education. Over the years, we took her to speech pathologists, we hired tutors, we read up on current research, and medicated when we thought it was necessary. We did every single thing that all the parents in education recommend when raising and educating a child with a disability. We told her, you can do anything, and we meant it. Her IQ was in the average range, like many children with learning disabilities. Last spring, she failed the global history and living environment regions for the first time, and I made her go to summer school, and I made her take them again. And that brings me to the diploma crisis. Did you know that starting with the graduating class of 2015, every single path to a diploma in the state of New York goes through a Regents exam? Every single path. That you absolutely must have a high school diploma to take a civil service test, join the military, attend a two-year college or vocational school, or even get a job. For a child with an IEP, there are some allowances. The local diploma now involves taking 5 regents and getting no less than a 55. There are no longer local diplomas tied to RCTs for cohorts entering school after 2011. There are still RCTs floating out there for children that are super seniors. These regents, the global history and geography, algebra 1, geometry, and algebra 2, are aligned to the Common Core. The algebra Common Core regents last year was a disaster, a front-page Newsday disaster. There are 15,000 students per grade cohort in the state with learning disabilities. Students in their junior year right now, as I said before, were not exposed to the Common Core until the second half of 8th grade. Now, I'm not saying that all 15,000 children per grade cohort in the state of New York are not passing Regents exams. I'm not saying that at all. Some children will pass them and they'll have no problem. But I also am concerned about the children whose parents, for whatever reason, declined special education services for students that clearly need special education services. What about the English language learners? Okay? What about children who flew under the radar and are just not academically inclined? What about those kids? I like, when I speak about this, I say all the time, I think my mechanic is brilliant. I pull my car into his parking lot, he listens to it for a few minutes, and he tells me what's wrong with it, and then he fixes it. Do I think that my mechanic can pass a New York State ELA exam? Not on your life. And I think he's brilliant. I'll say it again. Did you also know that the cut scores are manipulated by New York State Ed to keep the graduation rate from fluctuating? The cut score in the dismal algebra regents was a 35. A 35 in my world is failing. 65 is passing. When you can manipulate the pass scores for a test that's tied to a diploma, do as my friend Christine Zirkelback says, let's just cut them to 10 and everybody can go home. Okay? Let's just make the cut scores of 10 on all the regents, we can all go home and live happily ever after. The Global History and Geography Regents in its current form is the most failed regents of all exams. It has 50 multiple choice questions, a DBQ, and a thematic essay covering several hundred years of history across dozens of countries and 2 full years of material. Most children with learning disabilities have working memory deficits. My daughter's is in the 9th percentile. She would have to carry a hard copy of her notes into this test to pass it, and we'll get to that in a minute. Students from any of the other 48 states that do not require Regents exams can send their high school graduates to any one of our New York State universities and colleges. But many New York State parents are sending their learning disabled children out of state to get a high school diploma, and if they can't achieve that, they are barred from our colleges and universities in New York State. Do you understand that? That blows my mind. Every time that occurred to me while I was driving in my car, I said to my friend, I go, do you realize that I could move to Pennsylvania, get my kid a high school diploma, and she could go to college here, but I can't get her a high school diploma in the state in which I live and pay taxes? So I went in, so she fails the Regents, and I go in and I meet with her guidance counselor. And I go and I meet with her guidance counselor because now I'm a little alarmed. And I remembered hearing a couple of years ago that they were going to eliminate the RCTs. And I remembered at the time thinking to myself, oh, they'll never do that. That is so stupid. They will never do that. And she tells me that they have, in fact, done that. And then my daughter's got to pass these 5 regents of 55. And because I don't believe her, because I think to myself, who's that inept? I call New York State Ed. And I get a woman on the phone, and she's a very nice woman. And she tells me that, oh yeah, that's true. That's true that, 5 regents of 55. And I ask her repeatedly what the plan is, what New York State Ed's plan is for all the children that can't pass Regents exams. And she tells me about the pathways. In case you don't know this, there are currently 44 pathways to a high school diploma in the state of New York. And then I think to myself, are we graduating astronauts and veterinarians from high school? Because otherwise, why would you need 44 pathways to a high school diploma in the state of New York? But not one of those pathways, of those 44 pathways, is adequate for this population. So I say to her, like, and I'm not kidding, I'm driving in my car, she's on, my wireless, whatever, and I keep saying to her, what is the plan? What is the plan? And then finally, she actually says to me, true story, Mrs. Buckley, we haven't finished developing the plan. And I swear to God, I think the whole top of my head practically lifts off. And I think to myself, would you repeat that, please? Are you telling me that the agency that is responsible for the education of over 1 million children hasn't finished developing pathways to diplomas for the most vulnerable population in our schools? And she says, yeah. And I go, okay. And then I light up my phone. I pretty much light my phone on fire. I call, as Marla has suggested. I actually call several. Oh, and then she tells me, but the RCTs were eliminated, and I say, what replaced them? And she says nothing, and that's another thing. And then another question that no one can answer for me. Who was looking out for kids with learning disabilities when this plan was set in motion? Who was looking out for that? Who was responsible for that? Because I worked in the private sector before I became a teacher, and if I was that inept at my job, I'd be unemployed. But somebody actually has the job of watching out for children with learning disabilities, and they actually let this go. I think that person should be unemployed. I have their name if you want to know who it is. So I call, because this is a Board of Regents issue, I call Regent Tillis and I meet with him. I meet with him 3 times, and I won't say another word about that. And I attend meetings with multiple politicians. I meet assemblymen, I'm talking to senators. I call pretty much every regent, in the state of New York. I do start a Facebook page. I encourage all of you to join it. I started with 2 other people. It's called Multiple Pathways to a High School Diploma. I do also meet up with a woman named Betty Pilnick from Oceanside, and she is friends with Todd Kaminsky, who's currently running for Dean Skelos' seat, and he has been in the front of this issue right from the get-go. It is a problem. Every single person I speak to agrees this is a problem and it needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed. But I watched the regents' meetings, the last 3, and I've spoken to regents before that, and I watched the last 3 regents, and this doesn't even come up as a topic of conversation. What does happen is there is a waiver created at the behest of a mother in Brooklyn who I can only imagine is louder than I am, and I find that hard to believe. But I remember going to high school. I remember dozens of children that chose not to pursue regents' diplomas because their career paths didn't necessitate that level of scholarly study. And sure, I think raising the bar is a good thing. Like when they say that, I think, okay. But then I also know through my own children and through the children that I teach, that every child deserves the opportunity to excel at their level. I have a copy with me of the August 2005 ELA Regents. The ELA is called the gatekeeper, or the showstopper. There's a listening portion and then 8 questions. And this is the first 2 paragraphs. I don't even think I'm going to have to read the 2 because but I'll get into it. Are you ready? Pay attention. Rural and urban residents alike are increasingly becoming attuned to the way food tastes, despite or perhaps because of the abundance of highly processed matter that typically adorns our plate and lines our stomachs, meal after meal. Yet the era of convenience foods, absent of flavor beyond that provided by salt, corn sweeteners, and fat, is slowly waning as we begin to collectively comprehend the devastating long-term impact this kind of food culture has on public health. Nationally, 300,000 annual obesity-related deaths have finally managed to send small ripples throughout the public health and food policy arenas after languishing for decades in dead-end debates that link food decision-making with individual responsibility, many of which continue today. Clinging to the periphery of these debates is the role local food can play in reducing food-related health risks. Yet few efforts have clearly connected the impact of consuming locally grown food on public health and improved eating behaviors. Rural health professionals have an opportunity to fill this void. That's the first paragraph. It goes for a page and a half. This article is taken from an article called Local Food Consumption in Rural Public Health, published in Rural Roads in 2006. From their homepage, the award-winning quarterly magazine features articles carefully selected to engage, educate, and entertain. I thought that was amusing. The entertainment amused me. Those working to improve healthcare in rural America. On the very same regents, these words appear. Attuned, languishing, periphery, proliferating, linoleum, tuberous, durability, organically, contend, aptly, resurgent, ambiance, luminous, luxuriant, hankered, amenities, irksome, and ailerons. Anybody know what an aileron is? Anybody in this room know what an aileron is? It's a flying thing. It's a flying machine. And I only know that because it was in an article about flying. But when I read that, and that's from the August 2015, you can download it yourself and take a gander. Fascinating, right? My eyes glazed over after the first sentence. Now, imagine yourself, okay, as a high school student with dyslexia, a language impairment, and ADHD. And then I also thought, what relevance does this article have to students in New York City? How about the suburbs out here on Long Island? What's the relevance? And then I think, are we opposed to choosing interesting or at least relevant reading material for exams? Strikes me as a little bit unfair. It really does. And I did. I just thought to myself, okay, how unfair could you possibly be? I got nauseous when I first read the ELA Regents. I know dozens of children with spectrum disorders, dyslexia, and language impairments. There is no way these tests are accessible to them. Others, like my Caroline, have developed an anxiety disorder in high school. She was a content, happy child throughout her entire school experience, and now she cries, sometimes hysterically, at the thought of going to school. If I was in high school today, I'd have a nervous breakdown. On New York State ELA Regents, you will also find Chekhov, and you will also find Stephen Hawking's string theory. Okay? True story. Okay? 11th grade, junior year. But Chekhov is college. If you're majoring in literacy, Chekhov is college reading. Okay? So, New York State, in my opinion, has slammed the door in the faces of many children. This misguided, barely thought through policy is discriminatory, demeaning, mean-spirited, limiting, robbing, cheating, negligent. How are those for some words for it in the ELA Regents? Dream-stealing, door-slamming stupidity. It dooms children to entire lives living off of society. And that isn't our plan for my daughter, but apparently it's New York State Ed's plan. And I think to myself, are they prepared for the exponential societal fallout of thousands of kids that don't have high school diplomas? I think even here on Long Island, this really made me laugh because I live in the town that's the home to tax pack. And I figured the best way to get them hot on the Regents, to get them to change that policy, is to tell them that my kid's going to be in high school until she's 21, and you're going to have to foot the bill for that. So anyway, the feds require exit testing in science, ELA, and math. And so I have written to everybody that could possibly be written to, and I've said, okay, fine, detach the Regents from the graduation requirement. They don't need to be attached. And although, with the federal government, I'm still waiting for them to make good on their promise to fully fund IDEA 35 years later. And then there are also, and we've heard this too as parents of children with learning disabilities, there's disability organizations that have actually said we shouldn't ask for things to be different for our kids. And then I look at that and I think to myself, I would like you to explain to me why they believe everyone should be treated exactly the same. My child is not a hole, like, a square peg. My kid's not that round peg. So why does she have to be treated as that round peg? And with that thought process, we can still expect people in wheelchairs to climb staircases to get to their life's necessities. Here's a thought I want to say to them. You decide what's best for your kid, and I'll decide what's best for mine. We want high expectations for our children. That doesn't mean that they have to have the same standard. I am a teacher. I am disheartened by what has been done to our children, schools, my colleagues. I think today, in spite of all this reform, we are further than we have ever been from better schools. These schools today do not serve our children. Our children serve in them and feed a corporate monster under the absurd guise of, our schools are failing. I feel like Chicken Little, I heard that before. I shudder to think that we will be like California and in a few years handing out thousands of diplomas retroactively. I find it outrageous that kids from other states, I said this already, I'm repeating myself, sorry. I just want to make sure I covered everything. Things you also need to know. You must fail a Regents exam twice to access the appeal waiver, the one that I mentioned before that Brooklyn mom has, perpetuating a belittling test and punish cycle. All of the children with learning disabilities, even when we had to take the RCTs, you had to fail Regents exams. So not only did they make it hard for our children, they actually, going back to those people who think that, it shouldn't be different, they actually make it harder. If you've looked at the criteria for the CDOS, which I refuse to discuss because until they make that a diploma, it's a complete waste of anybody's time and money and effort. But the requirements for that are stringent, but they're not a diploma. I want to also tell you that this was something else that happened, and again, going back to what I said before about being inept at your job. So my daughter's scheduled to do the retakes of the living environment and the global history Regents in August, this past August. So remember I said you have to do 5 at 55? So there's a man named Mr. Katz up at the top of New York State Ed, and he's responsible for the test schedule. Remember I said 5 Regents exams, there's 4 time slots, 8:30 and 12:30 on August 12th, August 11th and 12th. 4 time slots. 3 of those Regents exams, 3 of those 5, show up on the schedule for August 12th at 12:30. Again, I say, and I think to myself, who's responsible? How hard is that? How hard is that? How hard is it to just separate disciplines? We're figuring that a kid's not going to end up taking, 2 math exams, have the 2, you know what I'm saying? But again, and I think to myself, if I'm that inept at my job, I'm unemployed. But anyway, I end up calling Bayshore where the tests are going to be administered to her, and I get this really another nice woman on the phone, and she says to me, Mrs. Buckley, don't worry, it happens all the time. We make it nice for them. And I'm thinking to myself, my daughter with a learning disability gets time and a half, so we're talking 4.5 hours per test, and as you know, she has to stay. If they give her a half an hour for dinner, 10 hours of testing. And I tell the woman in Bayshore, no, I don't care what you do. I don't care if you bring in an air conditioner and a swimming pool and you serve her burgers and I don't care what my kid is not sitting for 10 hours of Regents testing in the middle of August. No way, no how. I called New York State Ed. I get that very same woman I talked to in June. And she says to me, no lie, and this is why I'm telling you this. Within 4 minutes, she tells me that there's a waiver available, so that children do not have to take 2 Regents exams on the same day. They must start them, but starting them means that they crack open the book, write their name. Within 4 business days, I have a waiver, an addendum to my daughter's IEP that says that she can complete those tests with as much time as she needs. I say to this woman at New York State Ed, I'm sure Caroline Buckley's not the only kid in New York State that has this conflict. What do you do about the rest of them? She tells me I'm sorry, that's not my problem. That's up to their parents and their guidance counselors. And now I'm really mad, and I say to her, wait a minute, these kids have all been identified for you. The onus is on you to tell their parents that there's a waiver available. She says, oh, we don't have the manpower for that. And I turn around and say, well, you better have the manpower for the people that are going to contact you after I blow it out on Facebook. Okay, so now I'm telling all of you, and feel free to tell everybody else, because the fact that they actually have the waiver, and do not tell, my school psychologist had no idea, and she said to me, she actually said, Mrs. Buckley, did you threaten them? And I said, no. I said, of course not. And also, so that you know, there is also, the New York State ELA regions can be read aloud, the entire thing, which is another thing that they don't tell parents. For special children with learning disabilities, the New York State ELA regions can be read aloud. So anyway, when we return to the purposes of public education, which in my mind is to create thinkers and doers in a free republic, that is when we will be successful. Until then, I'm just looking for a Band-Aid. This must be fixed. Our children cannot wait, okay? Children in high school, they don't have an endless amount of time. And no matter how urgently I talk about this, and I've been talking about this now for a year, there's no movement on this. And it blows my mind because the class of 2015 has already been dropped. 2016 is 60 days away from graduation, roughly, okay? And there's nothing in setup for that. My daughter is a class of 2017. I don't know. Lastly, a high school diploma is not an indication of higher education. It is the culmination of basic education. If anyone wants to expand on that, they are free to do so in college, vocational school, wherever you go. As my daughter says, I just want to get out so I can fulfill my dreams. And it's a high school diploma. It's not a permit to do brain surgery. Okay, we've got a little bit of an elevated thought process on what a high school diploma is. I just want to check my notes and make sure I didn't forget to tell you something. This is my slogan. Many of our children have had individual education plans for years. To get a high school diploma, they should all have individual graduation plans. Thank you very much.
Don't you ever ask them why. If they told you, you would cry. So just look at them and sigh.